You mentioned that
Yeah.
in some of your remarks, and we were looking at this negotiation that's going on, which is, negotiation is always a good thing. Talking is always a good thing. But how would you categorize Putin's response to these negotiations?
Yeah, the offer in Istanbul last week was an insult to President Trump. I mean, President Trump has told President Putin several times, come to the table with a serious deal. And he's told him, stop doing Vladimir, stop doing the bombing. I thought there was a potential this time there would be a reasonable response. But instead, it was just a laundry list of every illegitimate Russian claim to Ukraine and every ridiculous request that they basically neuter themselves, demilitarize, and take no Western support. It was an absolute insult to President Trump, who has given President Putin more than enough time to come to the right answer.
Great. My time has expired. I yield back.
And now recognize the representative from Nevada, Ms. Titus.
The Trump administration was not the one that eliminated the Global Engagement Center, but rather you pointing in this direction. I said it wasn't me, but you meant Congress simply allowed it to expire. Now, the White House Republicans did indeed refuse to include the extension of the sunset in the FY National Defense Authorization Act, and based on some since debunked conspiracy theories. But the Biden administration tried to keep their work going by putting this mandate in the State Department's Counter Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference Office, the RFIMI. Now, unfortunately, then, on April the 16th, Secretary Rubio announced the closure of that office as a way to, and I quote, champion free speech. Now, since you asserted that Congress failed in its decision to not reauthorize the GEC, do you also believe that the Trump administration failed in its decision to close the RFIMI?
So, and I know your staff will go do more research, and you'll read that I've written 3 articles condemning the closure of the Global Engagement Center and President Trump's closure of this. I absolutely believe we need to counter disinformation. The closure of the Department of Justice, Department of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and Department of Homeland Security's disinformation shops was equally reckless by this administration. So I absolutely think that we should be looking for disinformation. Russia and China are aggressively conducting cyber-enabled economic warfare and influence operations campaigns against this country. The one final thing I'll say is the most deleterious, worst information operations campaign going on in this country is the use of TikTok. TikTok, you and Congress properly banned it last year. President Biden signed it into law. TikTok is being used by China to change the social narrative in our country, to convince the 180 million 18 to 35-year-olds who use it that the United States is not a great country, that China's suppression of Uyghurs is okay, that China's suppression of Taiwan is okay, that the Russian invasion of Ukraine is okay, and that Hamas's terrorist act against Israel was okay. TikTok needs to be banned. To me, that's the worst disinformation operation, but I agree with you completely that we need a global, something like the Global Engagement Center. I've argued for it for about 2.5 years now. I was just pointing out that the actual problem was Congress failing to reauthorize it.
Thank you. I just wanted the record to clearly show who all was responsible and what the whole context in the story was. And if you weren't answering it the way I had hoped you would, I'd take offense that you think my staff has to do my research, but you can write your own books. But thank you for that answer.
I now recognize the representative from Illinois, Mr. Schneider.
Thank you, Chairman Self. And before I do ask my question,